Hey guys, welcome to the Butter Chicken Podcast. So today we have a very special guest on our show, Charisma Thompson. She is a professor at the U of R. So I'm gonna read her bio to you. She graduated from University of Regina, which is great.
Yeah. Didn't get lost.
She has a degree from her graduate degree is from University of Carleton, and she has been teaching at the University of Regina since 2008.
It's been a while.
It's been a while actually. And one interesting fun fact, I did had an opportunity to take Anthropology 100 with her, and that was phenomenal. So highly recommend it. Wherever you're watching, take Anthropology.
Come take it on campus.
Oh yeah, that would be recommended. And currently she is doing some research on anthropology of death, rituals, and changing landscape of burial practices and violence and conflict in North America. Mm-hmm. So welcome to the Butter Chicken Podcast.
Well,
Podcast.
Well, thank you for letting me be a part of this. I really appreciate it.
Great. I'm very excited to have you. So I want to start off with the first question, right? Because I'm sure most of the people might not be aware. What is anthropology?
So anthropology is the study of humans. And often people think it's just a historical discipline. So we look at what happened in the past with humans and that it's not applicable to us now, in our current lives. But the thing about anthropology is it's a study of humans anywhere, anytime, any place. We have subfields. We've got physical anthropology, archaeology, we've got linguistic anthropology, and what we do on campus here, which is the sociocultural anthropology. And so that is, if people are still struggling with what anthropology is, it would be similar to sociology, except for we have a stronger cross-cultural dimension. And so we don't just look at why those people do those things. We constantly compare what's similar, what's dissimilar, and then we also turn the lens back onto our own culture.
That's very interesting. So in a nutshell, would you say somewhat it's cultural studies in terms of society?
It is cultural studies. It's the value that people give to being human. It's the performance of what we do in our everyday lives. So it's, why do we sleep on beds? Why do we brush our teeth? Why do we comb our hair or wash our face a certain way? So it's not just the practices themselves, but it's the value that we assign to those practices also. And so anthropology is looking at the holistic aspects of the human experience.
That's very interesting. And I actually, the first time I took anthropology with you, I have become a fan of this subject because it's very interesting.
It is, yes.
So you know what? I just want to talk to you about recently, as we all aware of that Quebec passed Secularism Law, and I believe, do correct me if I'm wrong, it's first of its kind in Canada, would you say?
First of its kind, with this much weight and backing behind it. There have been movements and little policies and things where people tried to bring in something like this, but this is definitely the big one.
Scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So my question is this, as we know, this bill is also, as you know, Bill 21, right? So putting a ban on all sort of religious symbols, especially for the people in a public service in law.
It seems to specifically be targeting individuals that are working for the government or in public realms that must be government funded or something along those lines. So in particular, they talk about public school teachers, government lawyers, judges, police officers, etc. So it is individuals who are representatives of the government or in a public domain where they could be seen as representatives.
So what do you think? Do you think this is unconstitutional and somewhat violation of Canadian human rights, because it seemed like it's been discriminating on basis of religious grounds?
So the legal aspect of it, I wouldn't be as strong with, but my gut reaction initially is yes. This does seem to be unconstitutional. It goes against basic rights that we have in Canada. And it unfairly is targeting a small group of individuals as well who are already experiencing heightened levels of violence or feeling threatened in the public realm as it is. So this just seems to be adding more fuel to that fire that's already there. And that's where it becomes scary for me, and that's where it becomes really damaging. So in terms of Canada, often when you ask individuals what makes us, Canadian, what are you proud of as a Canadian? The first thing a lot of people will say is we're multicultural.
Exactly.
Right? And what does multiculturalism mean? Because I think it's safe to say, and maybe you can speak to this, multiculturalism for me is very different to what it is for you as well.
Exactly.
And we need to acknowledge that this myth of multiculturalism isn't all that it's cracked up to be, but it is still something to be sought after, to hold up and to try and really strive towards that, rather than retreating in this complete opposite direction. And in Quebec, that's unfortunately what we're seeing with this.
So, in your opinion, and since you have a lot of experience academically and researching around these kind of topics and culture based on your professional teaching career, so what do you think the impacts, especially in this current day and age, impacts of these kind of laws on our Canadian society? And do you think is it going to divide us in future?
Well, I think it'll be interesting in how people react to this. So one of the things when I teach the intro course, I bring up the issue of not necessarily integration, because integration doesn't seem to be as big a problem in Canada. It's when people push for assimilation that we run into a big issue. Now, Quebec has a history of trying to preserve its own identity. And you can say, across Canada, we've got pockets of all these different identities, but we know historically Quebec has fought the hardest to say we want acknowledgement of us as a separate nation. We can be within the umbrella of the nation of Canada, but we are distinct from everything else that's happening here. So you can imagine that when other religions, beliefs, and different things start to come into the mix, they, I would assume, are feeling somewhat threatened. And so you can see, like, being backed into a wall in this kind of a way, how the first reaction is, we'll get rid of everything. Let's just strip it right down. Let's go secular and see if that works. And it isn't going to work. It's so unfortunate in that in some of the readings that I was doing for this, they have that grandfather clause in the bill. So anyone that was hired before March 28th, if they are wearing the hijab or they have religious symbols, they can continue to do that. If you change your job or your job title changes, then you have to now follow this new bill. So in one case, there's a woman who is, she wears a hijab. She does it for modesty. It's part of her spiritual awakening. It's part of her challenge, to be the person she wants to be. And so it's very important to her. She's a substitute teacher. So if she remains in the role of substitute teacher, she can continue to wear the hijab. If she gets a promotion, which she's trying to do, she's taking online courses right now to advance in her career, then she has to make a decision. Do I remove something that's important to me as a person? Like even putting religion off to the side, it means more than just a religious symbol. It's a part of who I am. Do I then have to shed that in order to advance my career? That's not the Canada I want.
That's very...
It's horrifying to think that,
It's quite interesting how it can impact people's life, right?
Yeah.
If somebody is trying to work hard, contribute to the society.
What we want them to do, to be good citizens, right? And then
these challenges. Oh, I am quite surprised to hear that
Isn't
story.
that unfortunate? Yeah.
So keeping those things, as you mentioned about the Quebec thing, right? How they want to isolate, but they want to I don't know what's the right word for that. Be like. Have their culture.
Well, they have the distinct identity. I mean, Quebec is a nation. now, right? So I mean that they have that secured in a symbolic form and in a national sense. But I think there's always that tension, that fear. You know, are we going to backtrack? And multiculturalism started as a bicultural program initially, and Quebec kind of lost a bit of glory in that when it was a new senator from Saskatchewan who actually said biculturalism doesn't work because Canada isn't bicultural, it's multicultural. And he said if it's going to be something that works for Quebec, it needs to work for all of Canada. And that's where Pierre Trudeau went, yes. And so we end up with, in 1971, our understanding of multiculturalism, or the Multicultural Act. And so you can imagine from Quebec's perspective already, they're going, wait a minute. You know, like we used to, it was a party of two, and now we've got, you know, this other issue. And so we were, in terms of language, bilingual, but multicultural. And so that's why, even though it simmered down the tensions that had built up with the Quebec crisis, then we end up with them being just a part of this mosaic. And I think, you know, and maybe rightly so, that they want more than just to be a little part of our mosaic.
Yeah. That's very interesting. So how do you see like the impact of this is just one bill, one law right now in Quebec, right? So keeping, as you know, share the story of that individual person who's trying to, you know, work hard in a career, move up the ladder. Plus, you know, how Quebec is, you know, going forward. You know, this could be a stepping stone for the grand scheme of plans. So how do you see the impact on Canada down the road for this of this bill, of this law?
I think in terms of this will be a test. Right, so people will watch what happens. They will see what appeals. Already, we know that it's being contested legally. So I think people are going to watch and see what happens with this. We already know that in certain areas of Canada, there is a tension that's existing, and there is this want for. I don't want to say saving certain individuals, but people seem to see some religious clothing, some religious symbols as being oppressive, and that in Canada you should be free to do these sorts of things. And so this gives them, you know, if this works, well then, hey, now we can, you know, make you more like us. And again, that's not the Canada I want to live in. I want to have a Canada where everyone I encounter, I immediately assume they're Canadian. Whether they have an accent, whether their skin tone matches mine, whether or not, you know, whatever it is, I assume everyone I meet is Canadian because that is what makes us stronger, is our diversity. It isn't us being the same.
Very well said. And what do you think, like, you know, let's talk about international reputation of Canada. Like, you know, internationally, we have a very good reputation. Like, we are known for welcoming different cultures and communities. I know this law is only in Quebec, but it's already making international headlines now after it got passed. So what do you think, how is it going to impact the Canadian image internationally?
I would say because Europe has had programs or bills similar to this already in place. I think France in 2004 already had this ban in place. So I would say from a European perspective, they might not, it might just be a blip, you know, oh, our Canadian cousins are now, you know, following suit or whatever. For countries that are struggling to have a good path with multiculturalism, this could be very dangerous for them because they might think, well, what's the point of this? You know, if we go down this multicultural path, you're just going to have it pulled away from you, and that it's going to create a more dangerous environment for individuals rather than it being more welcoming and more inclusive.
Oh, that's very interesting. And in your opinion, do you think, do we need these kind of secular laws in our Canada? Do you think there's any need, especially in this day and age?
I would think, I mean, you and I'm sure have experienced, you walk into some government buildings or different places where they might still have old images and different things up, and you think, okay, you know, do we need to? Okay, can we say it's historical and so it stays? Okay, that's maybe fine. But from another person's perspective, that might make them not feel welcome, might make them not trust the government or trust the state. So do we need this blanket banning? I don't think we need a blanket banning, and I don't think we need anything this extreme. I do think we need to be reflexive, though. We need to constantly be asking ourselves and hearing from the voice of the individuals as well. We don't need to dictate to people what you can wear and how you can express your religion or your freedoms as a Canadian. That's not what we should be doing. Like, I had a student in my intro a couple years ago who was from Afghanistan, and she said, when I was in Afghanistan, I was approached by people who said, come to Canada, you'll be safe, you'll be able to get an education, you'll be free here. And she said it sounded so wonderful that she spoke with her husband, they packed up their family, they went through the whole process to come here. She said, I land in Canada, and she said, I've never been in such a prison. She said, when I land here, I'm told by people, don't let your kids play out at night by themselves. You know, be aware of this person, watch for this person. If you dress like that, if you wear this, then someone might attack you at night. And she said, I've never been so afraid. And she stood up and she was talking to the students about this, and she said, I was lied to. You know, the Canada that you think you have isn't always the Canada that comes out in practice, and I think bills like this are going to make it even more difficult.
Especially for the newcomers, or it impacts everybody, right? Not just newcomers.
Absolutely. Like I just, and I was, just in thinking about the hijab and stuff, to me, maybe I think about things weird, but when I see it, I don't see it as a religious symbol. I see it as someone who's expressing something that's important to them. It's expressing an aspect of their identity that they want to show to me. They're proud of it. It represents a big part of who they are. And also, from my perspective, it gives me clues as to how I should, maybe speak to this person or reference, or, and it can make the transactions of human interactions much, much simpler. And if we're all stripped of all these identifiers, how are we going to survive? It's going to be a weird world.
So my other question is this, now we know upcoming federal elections are coming soon, right? So what do you think, because it seemed like a crucial time, right, for this bill, this bill becoming a law, and especially it's somewhat more kind of focused towards minority groups to some extent. So what do you think the implication of this law on the federal elections, how it's going to turn out?
I would say my assumption, again, I can leave this to my poli-sci colleagues more so, but I would say that it will receive support from very conservative groups that are already saying that we should have citizenship tests, and we should have, prove that you're Canadian by filling out this form, and do you have the aspects that qualify you as being, the true Canadian, which again doesn't exist. But I think for them, this will be a big check in the box of, well, I would support someone who would do that because it's protecting things or making things better. Now, having said that, we also know in conservative groups that there are some very devoutly religious people who might think, ooh, if they're coming for this, are they going to come for me? And that, you don't touch my religion. You can mess with other religions, but don't come after mine. So I think you'll see a divide in support, but I think some people will be very intrigued by this, which is unfortunate.
That's a very interesting to know. So I just want to say thank you for being part of this podcast. And before we wrap up, would you want to tell the people watching us, like if you're offering any courses online, especially online courses in fall?
So coming up in the fall, I'll be doing an online intro, I believe. We've kind of got it all set. And then the first time this semester in the fall, I'll be offering an ethnography of the United States and Canada.
Wow.
So that's the first time that will be offered here. And that's going to be looking at the impact of our identities now. So, Tim Hortons, hockey, some of those token kinds of things, but also how we got to a situation where Canada could find value in multiculturalism, whereas down in the States, it's, if you have a gun, you've got value. We have fairly similar histories. How did we have such a strong divide in how we approach very similar type situations? So that'll be in the fall.
In the fall, and no, that's good to know. Thank you for sharing, and I just want to say thank you so much for being part of this podcast.
Yeah, thank
and we can
you.
high five. High five.